Welcome back to Edgar Cayce Narratives. If you've been here before, you already know this channel is not about abstract ideas. It's about real patterns in human life that quietly repeat and slowly reveal themselves over time. Today, I want to talk about a very specific kind of experience. One that people don't always have the words for, but they recognize it immediately when it happens to them. Because it changes everything without feeling completely unfamiliar. There is a moment in some lives where something shifts so deeply that the person no longer feels like they are continuing the same story. It feels like they have started again, but not from zero, and not in a way that feels entirely new. It feels like a second chance. But at the same time, it feels like something they have already lived through before, just from a different point, with a different outcome waiting this time. If that feeling sounds familiar, then this story may feel closer to your own life than you expect. There was a point when everything in this person's life followed a direction that felt stable and predictable, with plans that made sense, routines that felt normal, and a sense of identity built from years of small, consistent decisions that shaped how they saw themselves and where they believed they were going. Then something happened that broke that continuity in a way they could not ignore. Not a small disruption, but a moment that divided their life into two clear parts, before and after. And nothing about that division felt temporary or reversible once it had taken place. For some, it was an accident that forced them to stop everything and face how fragile their life actually was. For others, it was a loss that removed someone or something they thought would always be there. And for others, it was a realization that arrived suddenly, without warning, and made their previous way of living feel impossible to return to. In the immediate aftermath, the changes were practical and visible. Routines were broken, priorities shifted, and decisions that once felt obvious no longer made sense. But alongside these external changes, something deeper began to move. Something that was harder to explain, but impossible to ignore. They began to notice that they were not simply rebuilding their life from the beginning, because the way they approached things now did not feel like learning from scratch. It felt like remembering how to live in a different way, as if the direction they were moving toward had already been shaped somewhere beyond their current experience. This is where the split becomes clear, because the life before that moment feels like a closed chapter that cannot be reopened, while the life after begins to unfold with a strange sense of familiarity, even though the circumstances are new and the choices being made are different from anything they would have chosen before. And what makes this experience so difficult to explain is not just that everything changed, but that the new version of life does not feel entirely new. It carries a quiet sense of recognition that does not come from memory in the usual sense, but still feels real enough that it cannot be dismissed. After that dividing moment, the changes do not stop at one decision or one adjustment. They begin to spread across different parts of life. And over time, it becomes clear that this is not a temporary reaction, but a full shift in direction that continues to unfold in ways the person did not plan. The first layer of change often shows up in priorities, where things that once felt important begin to lose their weight, and things that were ignored or postponed suddenly feel urgent and necessary, not because of external pressure, but because something inside now responds differently to what matters and what does not. At the same time, identity begins to shift in ways that are both subtle and obvious, because the person no longer sees themselves through the same lens, and choices that once defined them no longer feel aligned with who they are becoming, even if they cannot fully explain why this change is happening. This shift in identity leads to a reset in direction, where paths that once seemed fixed begin to open or close unexpectedly, and the person may find themselves moving toward work, relationships, or environments that feel unfamiliar on the surface but strangely natural in the way they engage with them. When you look at different people who go through this kind of experience, the details vary, but the structure remains consistent. Something interrupts the original path. A new direction begins to form, and over time that new direction starts to feel less like a reaction and more like a continuation of something that was already in motion. Some describe it as starting over, but that description never feels complete, because starting over usually involves uncertainty and hesitation. While this kind of shift often comes with a quiet sense of clarity, even when the situation itself is unstable or difficult to manage, this is where a more subtle pattern begins to appear, one that is easy to overlook at first, because it does not come as a clear thought, but as a feeling that stays in the background while everything else changes. And that feeling is the sense that this new life is not entirely new. People begin to notice that certain decisions feel easier than expected, certain environments feel immediately familiar, and certain ways of thinking seem to come naturally without needing to be learned step by step, as if they are stepping into a role that already fits, even though they have never consciously practiced it before. In conversations, this often shows up in simple statements that are easy to dismiss, but carry a deeper meaning when repeated across different cases. Phrases like, "I don't know why, but this feels right," or "I've never done this before, but it doesn't feel new," or even more directly, "It feels like I've been here before, just not like this." What makes this pattern important is not just that change happens, but that the change carries a direction that feels pre-formed, as if the person is not building something from the ground up, but stepping back into something that already has a shape, even if they cannot see the full structure yet. And when this pattern repeats across different lives, different situations, and different types of turning points, it raises a simple but difficult question: whether this experience is only a psychological response to disruption, or whether it is pointing to something that continues beyond a single starting point and a single ending. As this new phase of life continues to unfold, the person begins to notice a contradiction that is difficult to explain, because on the surface, everything points to change, but internally, something feels consistent in a way that does not match the idea of starting over. They can clearly see that their circumstances are different, their decisions are different, and even their sense of identity has shifted. But the deeper they move into this new direction, the more they feel a quiet recognition that does not belong to a completely new beginning. This creates a kind of tension that is not dramatic or visible from the outside, but very present on the inside, because the mind tries to organize the experience in a logical way, while the feeling does not fully follow that logic. On one side, there is a clear narrative that makes sense. Something happened, life changed, and now a new path is forming. And this explanation is simple enough to accept, but it does not fully capture what the person is actually experiencing. On the other side, there is a more subtle awareness that keeps returning in different moments, especially when something feels unexpectedly natural, or when a decision comes with a sense of certainty that feels older than the current situation. This is where confusion begins to take shape, not because the person doubts the change itself, but because they cannot fully explain why the new life feels familiar in a way that goes beyond memory, experience, or learning. They may try to dismiss it at first, assuming it is just the mind adapting to new circumstances, or a result of past experiences shaping current behavior, and in many cases, this explanation works well enough to move forward without questioning it too deeply. But the feeling does not disappear. It returns in quiet moments, in decisions that feel too easy, in environments that feel immediately known, and in reactions that seem to come from a place that was already formed before the current version of life began. This creates a subtle but persistent question that does not always become conscious, but still influences how the person relates to their own experience. A question that sounds simple, but carries a deeper uncertainty. Why does this feel like something I have already lived through, even though I know that I have not? At the same time, there is another layer to this tension, because part of the experience feels comforting. The familiarity brings a sense of ease, as if the person is finally moving in a direction that fits, but another part feels unsettling, because that same familiarity does not have a clear source. This combination of comfort and confusion makes the experience difficult to talk about. Because it does not fit into a clear category, it is not entirely new, but it is not a direct continuation either. And the person is left navigating something that exists between those two states. And the longer this continues, the harder it becomes to ignore the contradiction. Because the pattern repeats, the feeling remains consistent, and the explanation that once seemed sufficient no longer feels complete. At this point, the usual explanations begin to feel incomplete, because while psychology can describe how people adapt to change, it does not fully explain why some new directions feel structured in advance, or why certain experiences carry a sense of recognition that does not come from memory in the traditional sense. This is where a different perspective can be introduced, not as a belief that must be accepted, but as a way to explore the pattern from another angle, one that was often described in the readings of Edgar Cayce. In many of his interpretations, Cayce suggested that human life is not always a single, isolated experience, but part of a longer continuity, where patterns, tendencies, and unfinished directions can carry over in ways that are not always visible at the surface level. From this point of view, moments that feel like a complete restart may not be entirely new beginnings, but points where a previous direction resumes after being interrupted, sometimes suddenly, and sometimes without a clear sense of closure. Cayce often described situations where a previous life may have ended abruptly, through accident, conflict, or circumstances that did not allow a process to fully complete. And in those cases, the next life does not begin from a neutral state, but continues with a certain momentum already in place. When you apply this idea to the experience we are describing, the pattern begins to shift in a way that makes the contradiction easier to understand, because the feeling of familiarity is no longer seen as something that needs to be explained within one lifetime, but as something that may extend beyond it. In this context, the dividing moment in the current life takes on a different meaning. It is no longer just an event that disrupts a stable path, but a point where the direction of life changes in a way that aligns more closely with something that was already in motion before. This does not mean that the person remembers a past life in a clear or detailed way. In most cases, there is no direct memory at all, but the continuity shows up in how quickly they adapt, how naturally they move into certain roles, and how familiar the new direction feels despite the lack of prior experience. It also explains why the new life does not feel entirely new, because from this perspective, it is not being created from the beginning. It is being continued from a point that was interrupted, and the sense of recognition comes from that continuity rather than from conscious memory. This reframing does not remove the psychological explanations, but it adds another layer that addresses what those explanations leave open, especially the question of why some changes feel guided in a way that seems to follow a structure that was already present. It also changes how we understand the idea of a second chance, because instead of seeing it as a random opportunity to start again, it can be seen as a continuation that allows something unfinished to move forward under new conditions. From this point of view, the accident, the loss, or the realization that divided the person's life is not only a disruption, but also a transition point, where the direction of experience shifts towards something that may have been waiting for another opportunity to unfold. This does not require belief to be useful, because even as a framework for thinking, it offers a way to organize an experience that otherwise feels fragmented, and it gives context to a pattern that appears across different lives in similar ways. And once this perspective is considered, the original contradiction begins to change, because the question is no longer why the new life feels familiar, but whether that familiarity is a sign that something is continuing rather than starting over. When this pattern is examined across different people and situations, it becomes clear that it does not belong to a single type of event, but appears in multiple forms, each with different details but a similar underlying structure that connects them. One of the most common contexts where this pattern becomes visible is in near-death experiences, where a person comes close to losing their life and then returns, often describing a shift that goes beyond physical recovery, something that affects how they see themselves, how they make decisions, and how they relate to the direction of their life moving forward. After such experiences, many people report that their priorities change in ways that feel immediate and non-negotiable. They lose interest in things that once defined them, and they move toward paths that feel meaningful in a way that is difficult to explain, as if they are not choosing a direction, but recognizing one. Alongside these changes, there is often a strong sense of clarity, not about every detail, but about what matters and what does not. And this clarity does not develop slowly over time. It appears quickly, as if it was already present and simply needed the right moment to become visible. Another context where this pattern appears is in sudden life transformations that are not tied to physical danger, but to moments of realization that change how a person understands themselves, their relationships, or the direction they have been following without questioning it. In these cases, the shift may come from a single insight that redefines everything around it, causing the person to step away from a path that once felt secure and move towards something that was previously outside of their plans, but now feels aligned in a way that is difficult to ignore. Even though the external circumstances are different, the internal structure remains consistent. There is an interruption, followed by a redirection, and then a period where the new direction begins to feel increasingly natural, even though it was not consciously developed step by step. What stands out across these examples is not just the change itself, but the way the change organizes itself, because instead of moving randomly, it tends to follow a pattern where the person quickly settles into a new way of being that feels stable, as if it already has a shape that they are stepping into rather than building from the beginning. This is where the sense of familiarity becomes more noticeable, because it is not limited to one moment. It continues to appear as the person moves forward, in decisions that feel clear without extensive analysis, in environments that feel comfortable without a period of adjustment, and in roles that seem to fit without requiring long preparation. When different people describe these experiences, the language may vary, but the structure remains recognizable. They talk about feeling like they were given another chance, but also about the strange sense that they are not starting from zero, that they are continuing something that was already moving in a certain direction. In some cases, this feeling becomes strong enough that the person begins to question whether their life is following a path that existed before the current version of their story, not as a fixed script, but as a direction that can be resumed under different conditions. And when this pattern is observed across multiple cases, including near-death experiences, sudden realizations, and major life disruptions, it becomes harder to see it as a series of unrelated events, and easier to recognize it as a repeating structure that appears when a life changes in a way that feels both new and familiar at the same time. From a psychological perspective, this kind of experience can be understood without needing to assume anything beyond the current lifetime, because the human mind has ways of reorganizing itself after major disruption that can create a strong sense of change while still maintaining continuity underneath. One of the key concepts often used to explain this is identity reconstruction, which describes how a person reshapes their sense of self after a significant event that makes their previous identity no longer stable or useful, forcing them to rebuild how they see themselves and how they relate to the world around them. In this process, the mind does not start from zero. It uses existing patterns, tendencies, and values that were already present, even if they were not fully expressed before, and reorganizes them into a new structure that feels more aligned with the current situation. This can explain why the new version of life does not feel completely unfamiliar, because even though the external circumstances have changed, the internal material used to build this new identity was already there, waiting for a moment when it could become more dominant. Another concept that helps clarify this pattern is post-traumatic growth, which refers to the positive psychological changes that can occur after a person goes through a highly challenging or disruptive experience, leading to a deeper sense of meaning, stronger personal values, and a clearer understanding of what matters. In these cases, the shift does not come from adding something entirely new, but from reorganizing priorities in a way that brings certain aspects of the person into focus while letting others fade into the background, creating a sense of clarity that feels immediate rather than gradually developed. This can create the impression that the person has stepped into a new life, when in reality, they have reorganized their existing internal structure in a way that now feels more coherent and aligned, even if the path they are following was not part of their original plan. The sense of familiarity can also be explained by how the brain processes patterns, because when a person encounters a situation that matches certain internal expectations or tendencies, it can feel immediately recognizable, even if the person has not consciously experienced it before in the same form. This is similar to how people can feel comfortable in environments or roles that align with their underlying traits, even if they have no prior experience in those specific contexts, because the structure of the situation fits the structure of their internal patterns. From this point of view, the feeling of "I have been here before" does not need to come from memory of a past life. It can arise from the activation of deeply ingrained patterns that were always part of the person, but only become visible when the right conditions bring them forward. At the same time, psychology also recognizes that not all aspects of human experience are fully understood, especially when it comes to the way identity, memory, and perception interact in moments of major change, which leaves space for different interpretations without forcing a single explanation. This means that while psychological frameworks can describe how the process works in many cases, they do not necessarily close the question of why some experiences feel as structured and familiar as they do, especially when that feeling persists over time and across different contexts. When you step back and look at all these layers together, the personal experience, the repeating pattern, the internal contradiction, and the different ways of explaining it, a clearer idea begins to form. And that idea is simple, but not always easy to accept at first. Some beginnings do not feel like creation. They feel like continuation. And this is what makes the experience different from a normal life change. Because instead of building something entirely new, the person feels like they are stepping into something that already has direction, shape, and momentum. This helps explain why the new phase of life often comes with a sense of clarity that does not match the idea of starting over. Because starting over usually involves uncertainty, trial and error, and gradual adjustment, while this kind of shift often feels more direct, as if the path is already partially known. It also explains why certain choices feel easier than expected, not because they are simple, but because they align with something that already exists within the person, whether that is understood as psychological structure, accumulated experience, or something that extends beyond a single lifetime. In this context, the idea of a second chance begins to change its meaning, because it is no longer just an opportunity to try again. It becomes a continuation that allows something unfinished to move forward under new conditions, with new awareness and different circumstances. This does not mean that everything is predetermined or that the outcome is fixed, because the person still makes choices, still faces uncertainty, and still shapes the direction of their life through action. But the starting point is not empty. It carries something forward. And this is where the experience becomes meaningful in a practical way. Because instead of asking whether the feeling is real or where it comes from, the more useful question becomes what this sense of continuation is pointing toward and what it is trying to complete. When the experience is seen this way, the familiarity is no longer something confusing or unsettling. It becomes a signal that the person may already have a direction that fits them more deeply than the one they were following before, even if they did not recognize it at the time. This shifts the focus away from explaining the past and toward engaging with the present. Because whatever the origin of the pattern may be, the important part is how it shapes the choices being made now, and how those choices can move something forward that previously remained unfinished. At this point, instead of trying to decide which explanation is correct, whether this experience is psychological, spiritual, or something that combines both, it may be more useful to bring the focus back to your own life and the patterns you have lived through. Think about whether there has been a moment that divided your life into before and after, not just as a change in circumstances, but as a shift in how you see yourself, how you make decisions, and what feels important in a way that did not exist before. If that moment exists, then look at what followed. Not only the external changes, but the internal movement, the sense of direction that began to form, and whether that direction felt like something you were building from the beginning, or something you were stepping into with a strange sense of recognition. Pay attention to the parts of your life that feel natural without a clear reason, the decisions that feel right without needing long analysis, and the environments or roles that seem to fit you in a way that feels immediate rather than learned over time. These details may seem small on their own, but when you look at them together, they can reveal whether your current path feels like a completely new creation, or whether it carries a sense of continuation that you have not fully examined yet. And if there is even a small part of your experience that feels like a second chance, not just an opportunity to change, but a chance to move forward from something that feels unfinished, then the question becomes simple, but very direct. If this really is a second chance, in whatever way you understand that idea, what would you do differently this time, knowing what you feel now and seeing your life from this point instead of the one you started from before? If this perspective made you pause and look at your own life differently, take a moment to support the channel by liking this video and subscribing to Edgar Cayce Narratives, because it helps more people find these kinds of conversations and keeps this space growing in a meaningful way. I'd also like to hear from you, especially if parts of this video felt familiar, but you're not sure how to fully understand them yet. So feel free to leave a comment about what still feels unclear, or what part of your own experience connects to this idea of a second chance. And if there's a specific pattern, feeling, or life situation you want explored in a future video, write it down in the comments as well, because many of the topics on this channel come directly from questions that people are already living through, but don't always have the words to describe clearly.